Welcome back to the Boris Dirk podcast. We are pleased today to be joined by Noa Dalzell, who is a Boston Celtics writer for SB Nation and has been covering the Celtics all this year. So we're looking forward to getting her perspective on the team this year and just how good it is compared to previous years of the Celtics. So, Jrue, joining me as always. Noa, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we wanted to get started just with a little intro on how long you've been with the team, what that experience has been like. So, how long have you been covering the Celtics?
Yeah, I just started covering the team officially in August. And that doesn't count the fact that I had a Celtics website from sixth to ninth grade. But yeah, officially just this is my first season.
What was that website called? The sixth and ninth grade one?
It's still live. I can send you the link. It's bostoncelticsinfo.weebly.com. Never paid for the domain. Don't think that it ever came up in SEO, but it was a good to get my reps in young.
So, I presume you grew up a Celtics fan as well?
I did. Yeah, I grew up
Okay,
around here. I grew up in Brookline. Pretty much was a Celtics fan from the moment that I started playing basketball, which was as a young kid.
gotcha.
Hell yeah. And what were those which Celtics teams were you writing about as a sixth to ninth grader? I'm trying to think.
Yeah, it was like 2010, 2011. So kind of the
Oh,
end of the big three. I actually famously became a Celtics fan in 2009. So I missed the championship run completely and then became a fan the following year. Like I don't even think I even knew that there was a basketball team in 2008. So I consider myself, one of you guys in the sense that I've never seen my team win a championship. But yeah, I do feel lucky though because there's been a lot of good, really exciting winning years and teams in the Isaiah Thomas era and the big three era, and obviously the Celtics have been competitive for years now, so it's still been a very fun team to cover and fun team to follow.
yeah, we're just like typical basketball nerds who grew up on a little bit of the New England sports mafia that runs a lot of NBA/sports podcasting. So I think that we're always looking for uh, things to worry about with the Celtics. We're always hearing a little bit too much Jason Tatum praise from Bill Simmons, and so we really wanted to get a legit Celtics truther on the pod. I have to say, I was doing a little bit of prep for this episode, and I saw you said you're a huge Steph fan. Was there a Warriors phase before 2011, or is it just Steph alone?
Yeah, so I knew I probably shouldn't have put that out there, but I'm a fan of basketball, honestly. And my dad played professional basketball in Europe for like 20 years. He's actually one of the all-time leading three-point shooters in Israeli history. He's American, but ended up playing over there. And so three-point shooting to me was always like the most exciting part of basketball. And it's a little bit tempered now just because everybody can do it. So the thrill of a three-point shooter is a little bit faded. But I was in high school during like the 2015, 2016 Warriors era and, was playing and was a shooting guard myself and just thought that like the Warriors style of play was just like beautiful to watch. So it was less that I was like actively rooting for them to win. I was kind of like into them, and by 2016 I was definitely rooting for them to win that series in the finals, but it was more just so that I just think Steph Curry is just a incredibly dynamic player to follow. And I actually got to cover the game on Sunday. I was hoping to see a good like Steph performance, but obviously we didn't see that, but I'm not complaining with what we did see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how did you get into officially covering the team from where you started with your own Celtics blog?
Yeah, it was honestly, I kind of took a shot in the dark. I watched the games religiously. I'm always talking about the game with my family, with my friends. And I had been kind of writing just kind of random blogs for Celtics blog, and then they were hiring a paid writer position, and I work full time as a climate lobbyist, but I thought why not throw my hat in the ring and see if I can do it. And yeah, it turned into a much bigger thing than I had initially anticipated as far as actually going to games, going to practices, going to community events, things like that. I live really close to everything, so that's been really convenient. But it's been a really fun first year to cover a basketball team, that's for sure. I think sometimes I'm a little bit spoiled when I think of like what it means to cover an NBA team, that I'm probably not getting the most representative experience right now covering this historically elite team.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, so I mean, we're bringing you on at kind of a funny little 5-day stretch for the Celtics because they had probably their most impressive win of the season on Saturday and then one of their more disappointing losses last night. But yeah, I guess just to check in on where things are, how would you say that? I mean, I know this is your first year covering the team, but it being a fan, What would you say is the biggest difference between this team and previous iterations of this team, which have, gone far in the playoffs, but not quite gotten to that last step?
Yeah, I mean, the number one biggest difference, in my opinion, is Kristaps Porzingis, just because he brings them an element offensively that has just been sorely lacking. Jrue Holiday is obviously, an incredible acquisition, but he brings a lot of what Marcus Smart brought, but also obviously, a much better shooter and has some unique traits that Smart didn't have. But Porzingis is the biggest difference, just objectively, what he brings offensively. He's one of the most efficient post scorers we've seen in the last decade. And he also just has been really good defensively as well. Like, I don't think I realized, having followed him earlier in his career and not watching a lot of him in Washington, like probably most people, he's elite defensively, and he's one of the best rim protectors in the league now too. But maybe even more than Porzingis, the biggest change that we're seeing right now is that you have a bunch of guys that are just less concerned with their individual stats and individual performances. And I think a lot of that is just due to age. Like, Tatum is 26, Brown is 27. They're kind of past that stage of having to prove themselves in the NBA, having to show that they have a role to play, a place to be, all NBA, supermax contracts, like all that's already happened for them. And so really, like, there's this clear united vision of winning a championship together. And you can see that in their play. You can see that they're both playing more unselfish basketball for the most part. And also, I think just the team as a whole has just bought into this more kind of moving the ball, finding the right person, finding the right mismatch. It doesn't have to be Tatum and Brown for the most part. And so that's been a big difference and a big change. And then also just looking at last year, I followed the team very closely last year. Joe Mazzulla is just way more confident, way more comfortable in his role. He was able to put together assistant staff, a team of assistants that he selected, that he chose, had the offseason to kind of work together on, their philosophies, their schemes. And last year, the way, the position that he was thrown into with Ime Udoka hanging over his head, and all these assistant coaches that were actually not his, really not a good place to be for a new head coach. So I think that his comfortability and kind of the buy-in from everyone around him is a new dynamic as well.
Yeah. Porzingis taking 13 shots a game has the same true shooting percentages like under the rim bigs like Jared Allen and Zubats. It's been crazy to see, like, in a slightly smaller role, just how his efficiency has gone up, and all the things he does for them. I think one of the things that I've had a tendency to do over the last few years is just kind of pigeonhole, like, when I see a 7'3" guy, like, I kind of put a bunch of like 7-footers into the same bag as defenders. And watching a lot of Celtics this year, I've just been blown away by the nuances of his defensive game, like just his like small mobility things that other guys his size just don't have. But obviously the rim protection too. But yeah, crazy
Yeah.
Porzingis here.
And as a Knicks fan, I remember young Porzingis, who was a very different player from what he's evolved into, but he used to, like, posting up used to be one of the weaker parts of his game. Like, I remember, just like, despite his height, just because he's so skinny and his center of gravity is so high. I remember going against the Brad Stevens Celtics in like the mid 2010s, and they'd always put Marcus Smart on him, and he'd just sort of wedge him out of the post, and Porzingis would sort of settle for these longer fadeaways. But between his experience in Dallas and I think Washington last year, kind of being the top dog there, he's really, I mean, gotten elite at just punishing those mismatches. And yeah, I mean, from an outsider perspective, just watching the Celtics this year, he, even like game one of the season, I think they played the Knicks game one. I was watching it, and Porzingis, I mean, he's gone off, it feels like, in every game they've played the Knicks this year. But he hit like 2 or 3 threes in the first half from about 3-4 feet beyond the 3-point line. And all the driving lanes for Tatum and Brown were just like these giant highways to the basket. And it just felt like, oh no, this is a different, especially offensively with him out there, Celtics team. Because I mean, rim protection wise, him and Robert Williams are both elite rim protectors. But having that 5-out element where Tatum and Brown and Holiday and White all just have these, like, basically free forays into the lane because the big can't stay in there to protect the basket, just, I think, brings them to another level of unguardability.
Yeah,
and the one,
and
yeah, go ahead.
Porzingis's demeanor too. Like, you mentioned the Knicks matchup. I was at MSG like 10 days ago when they blew the Knicks out. Obviously, don't worry, Max, it's not your whole team. Things might be different. But yeah, it was like the whole crowd was coming for Porzingis. Like, a lot of boos from Knicks fans just trying to get in his head. And I feel like an earlier iteration of Porzingis would probably have been a little bit more emotional about it. He was just like stone cold, like, I'm here to do a job. And he might have been the best player on the court that game. But it's cold and professional with him. And super impressive to see. It feels a little different from the Mavs era where, like you said, Max, I feel like everyone would say, let Porzingis take 20 shots, post up, as long as the ball's not in Luka's hands. Now it feels like if it's a Porzingis game, the Celtics might be even more dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was at that MSG game as well. And he said afterwards, like, I loved getting booed. Like, I thought that was so fun. That got us all riled up. And, I think it's probably frustrating for fans of, the Mavericks and the Knicks who watched a Porzingis that didn't pan out the way that we're seeing right now. But and part of it is definitely fit. And, he has these elite players around him, and that makes it easier. You can't overreact to him because then you're going to get burned by somebody else. But I think he's just gotten a lot better. Like, I think he's just worked on his post ups. He's talked about it. Like, he said recently, I think the other day, he said, I used to want the ball more and I wanted it in the post, but I wasn't elite at that. And now I am. Like, I wasn't effective. He's one of the most kind of like willing to admit his previous downfall players that I've seen. Like, he's talked really honestly about all the things that he kind of went wrong in previous stints and why he's so kind of committed to this going well here in Boston. And we've seen nothing but good stuff from him so far.
Yeah, and I mean, the question with him for the last few years has always been health. This year, he's been pretty healthy. He's missed like 16 games out of the 60, which, I think he's probably been the most banged up of the Celtics starters, but at the same time has been around most of the time. So, I mean, are most of those just like sort of little knick-knack injuries, or is there any injury concern for him coming down the stretch of the season?
Think there's always injury concern with a guy that has had a couple of major injuries and is his height, and does seem a little bit, I don't want to say fragile, but like sometimes when he lands, the same landing that Jaylen Brown might have, like he just gets up and walks off and Porzingis kind of limps off, and you do see that. That being said, he's missed 16 games. He probably could have missed 8 of those. Like there's been very clear moments where he's missed a game where it's very clear that he doesn't need to miss it, but it's maybe he's a little banged up. He actually doesn't play in back-to-backs. Like they've never officially said that, but they split Al Horford and Porzingis on back-to-backs. Only one plays one game and the other plays the other. And so that's a few of those as well. So, I'm concerned in the sense that the playoffs are really physical and he doesn't have an extensive playoff, resume, and we don't know how he's going to hold up necessarily. I think he'll hold up just fine, but it is still a little bit of a question mark. And I'm concerned because I think people are talking about the Celtics team like they've already won the championship, and you need to stay healthy for a playoff run to win the championship. And so Porzingis is a part of that, but you can't have Jason Tatum spraining his ankle like he did in the Eastern Conference Finals. You can't have Jaylen Brown getting hurt. You need Al Horford for some of these matchups. So he's one of the guys that needs to stay healthy. But overall, in general, like injury concerns are always there when you're talking about winning a championship, and you really do need everything to go well. Like we saw that with the Nuggets last year. They were all healthy through that playoff run. Jamal Murray had his healthiest season, and next thing you know, he's having one of the most efficient seasons by a guard in the playoff run. So health in general is a question mark, but I'm not particularly concerned by Porzingis based on what we've seen this year. Like he's actually been pretty durable, and I think most of the games that he's missed have been kind of optional misses because they're looking at the standings and it's like, why does he need to play? There's no reason for him.
Yeah. It does feel smart to mix in some Spursian, like let's take things slow. I've seen you say that last year the Celtics maybe were thinking ahead a little bit too much, that the playoffs were in their mind because they'd already achieved a lot of those regular season accolades. Obviously not a regular season like this year, but like they were the best regular season team. And it was kind of, finals, championship or bust, however you want to categorize it. But this is the perfect team to load manage your 7'3", potentially injury prone center. We even outside of Porzingis, Jason Tatum this year, I was blown away realizing last night that he has a lower usage rate than Kyle Kuzma this year. And I'm not trying to shoot down the Tatum MVP case because I actually am starting to believe in it more and more. And I think like as NBA media fans, we talk about wanting players to sacrifice and not play like Harden, Luka ball, and then when they don't, like we say they don't have the stats to win MVP. And so I'm not that's not a knock on Tatum, but it's more just about like this is the part of the year where you just need to make sure your stars are healthy. And you have so much talent to go around that it's not worth it. But Before we talk more about this year's Celtics team, I just wanted to go back a little bit. Speaking of Tatum, you mentioned Missoula, the confidence factor with him, the staff. I just wanted to hear from a Celtics person, like what, from your perspective, really happened last year versus Miami? Was it shooting variance? What, like, was the locker room like out of whack for a moment there? What happened versus Miami, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was a combination of a couple of things. First, yes, there was some shooting variance. That being said, like at this point, just expect shooting variance when you face Miami in the playoffs. Like we've seen it too many times to call it variance, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that being said, like they went down 3-0 in a series that they never should have. And the reality of the matter is that Tatum and Brown both had kind of below average series, performances offensively. Jimmy Butler actually didn't even have a great series. I think that's like
Yeah.
he had such a good first round that nobody ever really looked back and realized that his whole playoff run was like kind of average for him, which is not a knock on Jimmy Butler. Like he's phenomenal, but that wasn't what happened there. I
It
think
was Bam.
yeah, yeah, and I think defensive connectivity was like really the downfall of the Celtics team. Like they and it wasn't just in that series. It was kind of the whole playoffs and it was kind of like the whole second half of the season, but you didn't see that, that 2022 defense at all, despite having the same personnel.
Yeah.
And a part of that, I think, is hard to explain, but you see it with the Bucks right now. Like they were a really bad defensive team a month ago, and now they're a really good defensive team. And they have the same people. And people, I think a lot of times people look at defense and they say like, oh, like they traded Jrue Holiday, that's why their defense sucks now. But really, it's more often like what your connectivity and your buy-in looks like, and what people are, whether people kind of know where everyone's going to be, whether people trust in one another. And they didn't have that for a lot of last year, even though they were still ranked one of the best defenses in the league. Like you could just tell by watching that it was a substantial drop off from the year prior. Right now, we do see that. Like I do feel confidently that most games, like you watch this defense and like they are clicking, and they don't have Rob Williams anymore, who was this like terror defensively at his best. They don't have Marcus Smart, who did some things really uniquely that this team doesn't have. But they do have 5 guys on the court that none of them have any holes defensively, and it's really hard to account for that as an offensive player. Like there's nobody to mismatch hunt. Teams are obsessed with hunting Sam Hauser when he's out there, and like even he's held up actually really well this year. And so to me, when I look back at the Eastern Conference Finals, like they didn't have an answer for what Miami was doing, swarming Tatum and Brown. Like Porzingis would have been a cheat code defensively and offensively against that zone. And I think that's a big reason why Brad Stevens went to go get him, because he realized that a guy like him to stretch the floor and to kind of poke a hole in that 2-3, in that zone would have been huge. But ultimately, I blame the defense. Like that was the number one thing that you can't have. That was not playoff level kind of connectivity, and everybody kind of acknowledged it. And they didn't. I don't know if it was like I don't think it was like a chemistry problem. Like that never came out. I feel like it would have come out by now that if there was something like that going on. So I won't speculate on that, but I think it was just kind of maybe a trust and buy-in thing with that
Yeah.
particular group that needed to be revamped.
Yeah.
Makes
And
sense.
I'd be curious to hear kind of your perspective on the Tatum and Brown playoff record, because on the one hand, I mean, the amount of playoff games that they've both played by age 26, 27, like they're both going to be so high on the all-time playoff games played list. I think maybe, well, LeBron obviously leads that list now. But Tatum was in game sevens, I can't remember if it was multiple series, but certainly in the Eastern Conference Finals his rookie year. And Brown was right there. They've both been in the playoffs, almost in the Eastern Conference Finals every year of their career. Tatum's had like signature moments like that game 6 against Milwaukee, the game 7 against Philly last year. But then at the same time, they've had their struggles against Miami in the past, and obviously in that final series against the Warriors. So I guess overall, how would you assess both of their playoff records and performances to this point? And I guess, do they look any different this year in addressing some of the issues that have popped up in the past?
Yeah, I mean, this year is going to be huge in determining kind of what the narrative around that duo is. Just because up until now, like they have been really young. I think it's very well stated that players don't usually win a championship when they're 24, 25. Like that's not the age that you lead a team to a successful finals run. So had they done it in 2022, it would have been pretty, out of the ordinary. And so like to me, the narrative around either of them being playoff droppers, which I hear sometimes it's not like the most prevailing narrative, but I think it's misguided. They've both had tough moments, but like Jaylen Brown was really good in the 2022 finals. Like nobody ever talks about that. He was very effective that series, especially at his age, especially on that stage versus a team that was really experienced. And Tatum has been really good pretty much most playoff series is minus that final series. And so I think like they actually have a pretty good playoff track record. I do think that it sometimes helps you to not have deep playoff runs because there's less of an opportunity to play bad. Like if you're going to go all the way to the finals, that's 4 series that you have to play well in, right? And most players don't do that. Like Jimmy Butler did not do that last playoff, and we talked about him like he's Michael Jordan in the playoffs, right? So like they've just had more room for error, I guess, because they've gone so far, and especially at such a young age, like ahead of schedule. Like there was no reason for them to go to the Eastern Conference Finals a couple of those first runs, but they did. And so now that's on their track record of another playoff series that they lost the Eastern Conference Finals, right? So you can kind of look at it either way. But I do think this playoff run is going to help kind of shape a lot of that narrative. And you know, they both had highs and they both had lows. Like Tatum versus Philadelphia, he was moments away from having a really difficult, brutal summer. Like had he not turned around Game 6 and hit those 4 3-pointers in the last minutes of the fourth quarter. And then 2 days later, he puts up the most points ever in a Game 7. So like the highs have been high and the lows have been low. And I don't think we have enough of a sample size yet to be able to make sweeping generalizations, except for the fact that we know that they can step up. Like we know that they're not afraid of the moment and incapable of reaching there. Like Porzingis, I don't know what he looks like in the playoffs yet. Like we don't actually have that track record. Tatum and Brown, we have that. And so like nobody has a perfect playoff record. And like Dirk Nowitzki until 2011, everybody thought he wasn't capable. Like LeBron for many years, everybody thought he wasn't capable. So like I don't really buy into this idea that they can't win together. But they are getting to the age where it is the norm to, if you're going to get over the hump, like over the next few years, it'll be when it happens. So I think a lot of that story will be told in the next couple of playoff runs.
Yeah, music to a Blazers fan's ears. Like the 2019 conference finals, getting swept by Golden State and being joked about, being made fun of just for making it that far. When Zach Lowe always says, like, just ask the Clippers. Getting to the conference finals is really hard. So yeah, I also think to your point about connectivity, like I know just from like occasionally still listening to Simmons and like Russillo that like a lot of mainstream people were still questioning Derek White like deep into last year. And there was a little bit of push and pull between Derek White and Marcus Smart. Now, like Derek White's role as the jack of all trades on the best team in the league is so firmly established. Like he's actually #1 on the team in offensive rating, #1 in net rating. And it's just it's a different looking backcourt. And I totally agree with you that this team looks more playoff ready. It looks like less of like a perfectly engineered regular season engine. But what I was going to ask before we went any further, on the backcourt, last year, Hauser and Pritchard were semi-regular rotation guys throughout the regular season. And then the playoffs came and neither of them played more than 7 minutes per game. Obviously, they're both playing a little bit more. Like, Smart and Brogdon are out. Jrue's in. There's more opportunity in the backcourt now. Do you think this is the year that we see one or two of those guys really make like a greater playoff impact?
They're kind of going to have to. I mean, like, I think Hauser and Pritchard will both see minutes depending on the matchup and depending on how they hold up against being hunted defensively. Like Pritchard really did not get much of a chance last playoff run, and then he was kind of thrown into a couple of Miami games and was immediately picked on by like Jimmy Butler looking for the mismatch. So like that's not putting him in a path to success. Like that's you can only fail from in that type of opportunity. And so I think ideally from the get-go, like those guys are in the rotation in the first round and like can handle the playoff type schemes, especially on the defensive end, because I think that's really where the question mark is. It's like they're the only two guys in the roster you can sort of pick on. Then I think they're gonna have to have a role in this team for a successful playoff run. Like if they're out of the equation, like you can't just roll with Al Horford on the bench, right? Like you need one of these guys to step up. They're probably gonna see less minutes than they're seeing right now. I think Xavier Tillman's probably going to be in that rotation as well. Though I would love to see a little bit more from him in this last stretch here. Like this is kind of I don't want to take it for granted because anything can happen still. Like it's not, it's not like they have the #1 seed on lock, but like ultimately this last stretch here is, preparing for the playoffs and not really worrying about game outcomes. And so seeing more Tillman minutes and seeing if he can hold up as part of the rotation, I think is also going to be important. I think that's why they got him a little bit more as insurance, but defensively, he can be really versatile and add to what the Celtics team is doing. Especially against guys like Giannis, guys where you can't rely on only Al Horford, who at the end of the day is 37, doesn't seem it. So I think those three, Tillman, Hauser, and Pritchard, should both be in the rotation to some extent, but it's going to depend on matchups. Like Grant Williams didn't play in the first round last year, and then he played obviously in the 76er series. So moving forward, so I think Joe Mazzulla is going to tinker with it, really depending on who they're faced up against and kind of what he lands on. But they have to have trust in those guys, or they would have done more at the trade deadline. Like that's what they spent the first half of the season figuring that out.
We are massive Tillman fans, and so we were a little bit annoyed that the rich just got richer. He's an awesome fit for you guys. And I think he's got to be a playoff guy, just the way he moves on defense, and like he has the requisite skills to stay relevant as a modern big come playoff time. Last thing I'll say before Max, you take over. It's easy to like know, like from like a fantasy basketball perspective, that Sam Hauser is 6'8". And then like I saw him live for the first time. I'm like, that dude is fucking huge on top of the elite shooting. It's hard for me to ever imagine him being a complete defensive liability just because of his size. He moves well. And then on Pritchard, Portland fans are all kind of secretly wishing that he gets like phased out of the playoff rotation. And because our Blazers' dream is just to build a team of guys from Oregon, and Pritch, the way Pritch passes and relocates, I actually think is so elite. And if his shooting ever got to the level that I think it can get to, like, I don't think we've seen anything close to Pritch's ceiling. I'm a huge believer. I watched him dominate Oregon for years. And I think that, yeah, there's an untapped ceiling for Pritchard offensively for sure.
I totally agree. I think he's like a 20-point per game scorer as a ceiling. Like I resonate with everything you said. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking to the playoffs, and Tillman, I feel like he brings an element that the team was missing with Grant Williams going out the door, of just kind of like a big body to particularly throw at Giannis, but also some of the other bigs in the East, whether it's Joel Embiid if he comes back, or Julius Randle, just some of the guys who play with a little bit more muscle and just sort of a bruising nature. And Tillman, I mean, he's shown in the past he matches up well with athletic bigs. Like I know LeBron was hurt in the playoffs last year, but he did a pretty good job on him in the Grizzlies series. In the regular season before, he's done a good job on Zion in the games that I've watched New Orleans play against Memphis. So I just think he has the best chance of kind of standing in Giannis's path and absorbing the contact that comes from that, compared to, Porzingis, who's got the high center of gravity, and Horford, who's 37, as we mentioned. So yeah, I guess moving to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Say again.
Don't underestimate Horford.
Oh no, I would never.
I think he's still the go-to guy in any of those matchups defensively.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. Oh, I love Horford. And Luke Cornett. Is he gonna play in the playoffs? Because like there's some weird like advanced stats that tell you Luke Cornett's like a really solid per 36-minute big.
I think he'll probably get some run, but again, I think it's gonna be him or Tillman based on the matchup, which is already what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So of any team in the East, what team in the East do you think matches up the best with Boston, or would kind of make Celtics coaches sweat the most going into a series with them?
I'm taking all logic out and I'm saying Miami. Like, I don't care how they've looked this year. I don't care that they haven't necessarily gotten a star piece and that Terry Rozier hasn't been a perfect fit. Like, 100% Miami is the biggest threat to Boston. And anybody that, and I know most people that cover the team don't agree with me on this, but sorry, like I'm just looking at the last few years here and I'm going with history. Milwaukee, they're clicking more now. They look a lot better than they did a few weeks ago. So they'll be a tough matchup as well. And I don't love the idea of facing a Joel Embiid 76ers team in the first round, which is what it's looking like it could be as they continue to fall through the standings. But yeah, Miami they have the Celtics number a little bit, and it doesn't really matter who they have out there. Like they signed Patty Mills yesterday, and I was like, that guy's going to score 20 points against the Celtics in a game in this playoffs, and we're going to be like, how did this happen? So I'm taking scheme out. I do feel a lot better about the Celtics matching up against them with Porzingis on the team, but we don't know what Spoelstra is going to pull out, out of his sleeve in the playoffs, and who Jimmy Butler is going to turn into. And Duncan Robinson has just looked like phenomenal. So they're always an intimidating force to me.
Yeah, I know both Milwaukee and Boston are hoping that Miami falls on one side or the other of that bracket and is not in the play-in tournament, and they have to play them in round one. Because yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Heat on this podcast. I think they're a better and deeper team than they were last year, with the addition of, Jaquez gives them a different scoring element than they've had in the past. Is just another guy who can create for himself. Duncan Robinson's taking a huge step this year as a ball handler and just as sort of expanding his offensive game beyond shooting. Bam's taking a step. Jimmy's Jimmy. Like, we've seen it in 3 of the last 4 playoff runs. When the time comes around, he's one of the top 8 players in the league, even if for most of the season he's closer to 20. And yeah, I think it has to be Miami as well. I do think, teams that can, like, maybe the only weakness of the Celtics team, and it's not even really a weakness, but they're probably a little bit more susceptible to physicality than, some elite teams in the league. So teams that can kind of impose their physical will, whether that's Miami. Yes, I'm going to bring up the Knicks, but we'll see. And the Celtics have handled them to this point pretty well this season. In the years past, it's been more competitive. And then I do think in a hypothetical matchup against Milwaukee, I think both teams with the Dame and Jrue flip are less well equipped to guard the other than they have been in past years. In years past, the Celtics could throw a combination of Marcus Smart, Grant Williams, Robert Williams, Al Horford, all these sort of big, stocky guys in Giannis's way and really slow him down. And now I think in general, the body types are a little bit more lean. And Giannis, I think, will have a little bit more success in the paint. But at the same time, I mean, if you're picking 2 guards to chase around Dame Lillard and try to take him out of a series, there's no one better to do that than Derek White and Jrue Holiday. We've seen Jrue Holiday do it in the past. Sorry, Drew, for bringing that up. Back when he was in New Orleans.
Fucked up.
And Derek White, obviously, we've touched on, is one of the best guard defenders in the league. And now that Milwaukee's kind of starting to hit their stride, it seems like we may get that series that we were all looking forward to over the summer in the conference finals. But yeah, I also have to think that Miami, just with their additions, their added versatility this year, and just Spoelstra seemingly being able to win a game and a half, 2 games in every series, just with his coaching advantage against pretty much anyone he goes up against, is pretty wild.
I still have no idea how they got Rozier for what they did. Like, it feels like the market pauses every time Miami wants to acquire a player. And it's so classic Heat. Like, they got Rozier. I literally texted Max, don't let me not pick the Heat to make another deep run. Like, this is so, and then Rozier's been kind of inefficient his first few weeks as a Heat player. And Caleb Martin is somehow like the old Caleb Martin again, not like outplaying Jaylen Brown in the conference finals. And it's just become so easy over the course of the regular season to forget that this team, like Night at the Museum, will just come alive at the right time and wreak havoc on both of your teams, honestly. Max also dealt with it last year.
Yeah. No, we don't want to play him either. So I want to talk about Jrue Holiday a little bit, just because I felt like he's been the most unsung of the Celtics starting 5. Like, obviously, Kristaps is the shiny new toy. He gets talked a lot about. Jason and Jalen are the, 2 building blocks of the team. And Derek White, there was a big Derek White all-star push. But Jrue Holiday is someone who, I mean, he came into the year, most people would have probably had him somewhere in the 20 to 35 range as far as best players in the NBA. And if you made that, I think he's the same player as he was then, but just because his role is so much smaller, if you made that same list now, he would probably be lower down people's lists, just because he hasn't really gotten the chance to shine offensively as he did in the past. But I mean, in watching him, I think he's still the same guy. His efficiency is way up. NBA University is always tweeting out these, ridiculous corner 3-point shooting numbers from him. And yeah, how would you say Jrue has adjusted to the team? What do you kind of expect from him come playoff time? And yeah, do you think his role is going to expand, or is he still kind of doing this sort of Marcus Smart cosplay outside of looking to score a little bit more sometimes?
And how did the Blazers prepare him to win a championship?
His role is probably not going to expand if everyone stays healthy. So hopefully nothing kind of major happens. Obviously, when, he's had some bigger games as far as scoring goes when they've been down a starter or 2. Like, that's been a consistent trend throughout this year. So I could see that happening. But he's bought in perfectly to this role of being the 5th option. a spot up shooter, and then taking the toughest defensive matchup a lot of times. And that's not something that I think a lot of NBA players have done effectively. And so to me, the fact that he's been named unofficially to the Olympic team this summer is a perfect representation of the fact that he's still actually a top 30 NBA player, even though he certainly doesn't have top 30 NBA player responsibilities. And there's a reason why the Olympics team is not just putting together, Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Halliburton and all these really kind of star point guards that have done so well this year, because that's not how you make a winning basketball team, right? Like, you need to have guys that are willing to sacrifice, play defense, get rebounds, kind of move, facilitate, do all of those things that Jrue Holiday has been shown to do this year. And I think that's what they were hoping to get from him when they traded for him this offseason. Like, the intention wasn't to get Milwaukee Bucks or Pelicans Jrue Holiday, but it was to get a guy that can play that fifth role and not worry about his own stats or his usage rate or things like that. And he's 33, he's won an NBA championship, he's gotten lots of big contracts, he's the highest paid player on the team right now. And so I think that he's fit into it perfectly. Obviously, the shooting has been insane. Like, the corner shooting percentage, I think he's up to like 65% from corner threes this year, which is pretty unreal. And that's been, it's been helpful to them. And he's not the first guy to shoot really well coming onto the Celtics. Like, Malcolm Brogdon experienced a similar bump last year, because all of a sudden he was on a team where he's wide open all the time and he's getting the ball right where he wants it, and nobody's really able to pay attention to him, despite the fact that the scouting report says he's one of the best shooters in the league from particular spots. Because, hey, like, you have to let that beat you over, Tatum or Brown going for 35 again. So I think he's been everything that the Celtics could have hoped for and more. Defensively, he's been pretty stellar. Like, he's had some games where he's looked a little bit slower than maybe like prime Jrue Holiday, and there's a couple matchups that haven't gone particularly well for him. Like, I think SGA is a tough matchup for him. I don't think he'll be the point person for SGA if they were to kind of, but I mean, they won't, but if they did face in the finals. And so, like, he's shown that he's versatile, but I think more than anything else, it's been the mental thing that he's brought to this team. Like, he brings a championship pedigree, and he's also like effectively the quarterback of this defense, which is not the role that he had previously. Like, he's talked about it extensively. Normally it's been a Brook Lopez, a Giannis that's calling things out, that's, directing the guards. Jrue Holiday has that role on the Celtics team, and I think it's a big reason why we're seeing a better defense than we had last year from just a schematic and a connectivity standpoint.
That's super interesting. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way, but in a sense, like, Jrue Holiday is an antidote to the exact thing that has ended recent Celtics seasons, which is like when offense affects defense, morale is low. Like, we literally saw Jrue in 2021 go from, like, shooting slightly inefficiently in the finals, but playing elite defense, and obviously a key cog on that title team, going straight to Tokyo, I think it was, to be the second best player after KD on that Team USA, also not shooting well. And nobody questioned the fact that Jrue was the second best player on that Team USA, doing everything except make shots. And so, yeah, I think he's a perfect national team player. But maybe, just maybe, that is one of the key things that gets the Celtics over the hump this year, that they have a guy who is willing to go 5 for 15 in a deep playoff game and still make all of the winning plays and not let it impact body language, mentality, etc.
And then
actually, oh, sorry. No, before the season started, before they traded for Jrue Holiday, I looked back at the last like 25 years of NBA teams that won the championship, and I think like 2 of them didn't have a player on the roster that had previously won a championship with either that team or another team. So it's really unusual to break through and kind of win a first NBA championship. And obviously the Celtics team has had to go for that the last few years, and now they have Jrue Holiday and they have Sam Cassell on the coaching staff, and so they're no longer like newcomers to the idea of like, how do you do this? They have people in the room that know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, Jrue Holiday's had some kind of offensive struggle playoff games in the past, as Jrue highlighted. Like, even in that Buck series, I remember some games against the Nets where he was like, 3 for 15 or 5 for 20. But yeah, the defensive effort never changes and the connectivity piece never changes. And with all the weapons the Celtics have, like, he doesn't have to take 20 shots. Also, he can go 3 for 7 or whatever, just shooting threes.
Right. Yeah.
And the other question I wanted to ask with Jrue is, I have to be careful with Jrue versus Jrue. It's a tongue twister for me, but he does have a player option this summer. He's the only guy out of sort of the core 6 who's has like a potential contract situation this summer. has there been any noise about like how the team expects that to play out? Like, will they have the finances to be able to pay him this summer? Are they expecting him to pick up that option or to sort of test free agency? Has there been any rumblings on that?
There's been probably less rumblings than you'd expect just because there's so much like going on with this team. And, Derek White also will be up for a contract extension this summer, although he has another year left on his contract. Wick has said on multiple occasions, Celtics owner, that he really wants to sign Jrue Holiday. That's like a number one priority going into the offseason. And so I think on the Celtics side, like this is going to be a priority. On the Jrue Holiday side, he has said all the right things. He said, he's so happy here. This is great. He loves Boston. He loves the Celtics. Like he hasn't said anything to make anybody think that he wants out. But that being said, like he's also a smart guy. Like, I don't know, maybe he's going home and saying like, this is fine for this year, but I don't want to have this small of a role offensively on a team and let me test the market. Like, I actually don't know, right? Like, and I haven't followed him his whole career as far as like how he interacts with media and what he says and versus how he thinks. I don't know if he's like a super transparent guy. So as far as rumblings go, like it's been all good. It's been all like we want to stay together in the long term. That being said, like which I think it's just speculation on our end at this point. And I think Derek White too. There's a question around like, is he gonna sign an extension? They were thinking, that he was in talks this past offseason. I think the Celtics are probably kicking themselves that they didn't extend him when they had the chance because his market value definitely went up this year. But keeping those two guys is going to be a priority for at least next year. But then after that, I think the finances get really tricky, and I haven't played around with the numbers. There's definitely people that are better on that front than I am, but I think that they probably can't keep this whole core for more than next year, unless someone takes a massive pay cut that's unexpected.
Yeah. I mean, once you get Tatum's contract, once his extension kicks in, is going to be in the 50s. Jaylen Brown's in the 60s, I think eventually. Kristaps, I can't remember exactly how much he's making, but it's like 30 or 40. And the other interesting thing with Jrue Holiday is actually thinking back, I don't think he's ever been a free agent. Like every team he's ever changed has been due to a trade. He traded Philadelphia to New Orleans, then traded New Orleans to Milwaukee, and then Milwaukee via Portland to Boston. So and it's also a weak free agent class. So it's a class where he could, if a team wants to throw a massive 4-year bag at him, it's a class where he could get that. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what the luxury tax situation is with paying all those guys, but at the very least, I mean, this year it's having him, I believe is the highest paid player on the payroll this year at 36 million with the talent that the team has is a godsend.
God, I hope we get to see them play the Bucks in the playoffs. It's just,
That'd
I'm
be
sure,
fun.
I'm sure the broadcast teams will be so annoying about like, they'll give us all like the sound bites, the old sound bites from Jrue and his wife about how it was so unexpected and they'd laid their roots in Milwaukee. But yeah, I just can't help but wonder if there's any sort of tactical edge, as like Jrue was kind of the general of that defense, and now he's on the biggest problem team for that Milwaukee defense. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I have a feeling we'll see that matchup in the playoffs, like it's in some form at some point. And they've had Jrue actually on Giannis a couple times this season when the teams have faced off. I mean, they still have two games left to play over the next month or so, so it'll be interesting how those games go. But like, there's so many different looks you can throw at Milwaukee, and Jrue is so versatile and kind of a lot of times he takes that bigger player just to kind of bang around and make life more miserable. So yeah, he's been I mean, he's always been one of my favorite players not on the Celtics to watch just because of all the intangibles that he brings. And so it's been really fun seeing him on the Celtics team, just like perfectly representing like this unselfish team first mentality that they're trying so hard to preach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you mentioned the Celtics Bucks matchup. This week the Celtics, and I'm actually very interested to see the next Celtics Bucks game. I feel like the last game of the season, Celtics may be resting guys, like they'll have the 1 seed locked up, but I feel like, and it's been a little annoying the first 2 games because like the NBA scheduled both of them. So like the first one, the Bucks were on the second night of a back-to-back and they went down a ton, sort of had like a little fake comeback at the end. And then the second one, Celtics were on the second night of a back-to-back, Bucks had 1,000,000 threes. So it doesn't really feel like you've been able to take all that much away from either of the 2 games they've played so far this year. So I'm looking forward to that game end of March as just like a measuring stick for where these 2 teams are and have the Bucks sort of how far have they come since the beginning of the season. Celtics are playing the Nuggets this week, I believe tomorrow, which is a game that I'm definitely looking forward to. Potential finals preview. I know they've played once so far this year. I believe the Nuggets won that one in Boston. Is there anything specific that you're going to be looking for in this matchup in terms of how the Celtics play the Nuggets, since very well that could be the finals?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this game tomorrow. The Nuggets won, I think, by 2 when they were at TD Garden, and it came down to a Jason Tatum missed fadeaway that we saw once again last night. And so the parallels were definitely there, but it was a pretty good game. Like Boston did not play bad. I think the Nuggets just outplayed them a little bit towards the end there. The biggest thing that I'm curious about is in general, like what kind of looks do you show Jokic? Like there's obviously no good answer for any team in the league. But it's always every time those two teams face off, you can kind of glean a little bit more insight into what Mazzulla and the coaching staff is thinking. But the biggest question, and I hate to be like a talking head about this, but the biggest question for the Celtics will remain like late game execution. And I don't mean like last 5 minutes, because they've been really good in those stretches, but I literally mean like last possession. And I don't know that that's going to be tomorrow's game. Odds are it probably won't be a last possession, but it's where my head's at because of what we saw last night versus the Cavaliers and what we saw versus Denver earlier in the year. Like, can you mix up the look that you're getting at the end of that game? Like, does it have to be a Tatum fadeaway, or can it be any of the other like wonderful offensive options that you have? And so that's what I'm curious about. I think it's the main question mark about this team right now is not, again, like I want to make that distinction because they've actually been really good in clutch time, pulling away in those last 5 minutes. But when they're down by 1 with the ball and 20 seconds to go, like I don't have a lot of confidence in them. And I think most people that follow this team would say that. And that's not me being like negative or me being like a hater. It's just like looking at what the last couple games have looked like. So curious about that. And then also curious about like Jrue Holiday was like barely being tended to versus the Nuggets last time. They had Jokic on him, who was like not really guarding him. And so in those moments, like, can Jrue Holiday shift mentally and say like, okay, I'm going back to Milwaukee Jrue Holiday, or like I'm not gonna like act like I'm this weak fifth option, or does that disrupt them too much? Like that's a question that I'm just in. A lot of times this happens where they put the weakest defender on Jrue Holiday and they kind of ignore him, and sometimes he makes them pay, and sometimes he kind of like almost reinforces that, like he kind of feeds into what they're doing to him. And so that's something that I'll be curious about. Like if Jokic is on him again and he's playing off of him, is Jrue Holiday going to be a little bit more aggressive, because we didn't see much from him in their previous matchup?
Yeah, to your point, like it's really hard to find a metric this year that tells you anything but that the Celtics are the #1 title contender, excluding, last year's outcome. They're 22-1 versus teams below 500, which is pretty crazy. And so you think, oh, then maybe they've been beating up on bad teams. No, they're 26-12 against teams above 500, which is also the best in the league. The one stat that I found that I was like planning to throw at you and see what you thought is that in games decided by 3 points or less, they're 4-5. And it's like literally the only losing record in any sort of vertical you can find for this team. But yeah, I agree. It's been an interesting piece of the last couple of years, is like they have this beautiful free flowing kind of dribble drive offense with a lot of shooters. And then at the end of games, it gets a little bit stale. But I feel like that's been such a part of the conversation. I'd really be shocked if we're in the playoffs and there are more of those Jason Tatum end of clock, end of game fadeaways. I don't know. We'll see.
To me, it's kind of like the more they happen in the regular season, the more unlikely they are to happen in the playoffs. In my eyes, like if you're 0 for 6 on it this year, like maybe then it's a little bit easier to not do it in the playoffs, versus like if you're 0 for 1 on it this year, then like you go to the playoffs and you're the guy and you go for it. And it's not about Tatum taking the last shot. Like I have no problem with that. It's that's not his shot. That fade away from the elbow with 2 people on him. Like get a post up, get a drive, get, anything that he takes during, like he doesn't take that shot very often in games. And he's not the only person that does it. Like Jimmy Butler does it all the time too. All of a sudden he's doing a fadeaway deep 2, and like he doesn't make it usually either. So I think it's like a little bit of a habit that teams fall into, where they like want to at least get a shot off. They don't want to get blocked. They don't want to turn it over. And then in turn they take a shot that's low efficiency, that's a win for the defense. But yeah, I'm always, every time they face a really good team, I'm curious, like, are they going to end up in that position, and are they going to surprise us and maybe throw a Kristaps Porzingis post up that's been the best action in offense this year?
Yeah.
Like
and to your point, like on a Blazers team that has kind of Dame and not much else, like that is the best shot at the end of the game. It's the embarrassment of riches that the Celtics have that makes you wonder why they haven't gone to higher percentage looks when it matters most. But yeah, any chance that we are going to be seeing a Jordan Walsh appearance toward the end of the season. I really liked him coming out of the draft. We can't spend more than 30 seconds on this though.
Yeah, I love Jordan. I've followed a lot of the games in Maine. I go up there all the time to watch. I think we might see him in the last few games of the season, just when they're resting their guys, but we're not going to see much more from him. Other than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be curious seeing I feel like, I mean, Al Horford's gonna have to play a huge role in any Celtics Nuggets series, just to have extra big bodies to throw at Jokic. I feel like it's not out of the realm of possibility in that potential series. They could end up starting Horford and trying to do the sort of Horford post defense on Jokic with Kristaps roaming that a lot of teams have tried to do against Denver. So I'd be curious to see that as well. Yeah, my last question on the Celtics is, there's been a lot made of best net rating in the league, fourth best net rating in NBA history to this point. And the three teams above them have all won the championship. Everyone in the top 10, except for the 73 win Warriors and forgotten great team that we love on this podcast, the 15-16 Spurs, which went 40-1 at home, but everyone always brings up the Larry Bird Celtics as the only team that's done that, but the Spurs did it too. So I guess with all that said, first in offense, second in defense, do you think we are watching a historically great team, or is it kind of too early to tell?
I mean, we're watching a historically great team because the numbers tell us we are, but a historically great team has to win the championship, right? So I think we're getting a little carried away with just like all the conversation. And I know it's like media, it's like what you have to talk about something, and these shows, like, this is what they debate. But I think right now, like, the Nuggets should still be the favorite. They won the championship last year. They've shown they can do it when it gets, when the moment matters. Like, those guys have stepped up. And so to me, like, this talk of like the Celtics are so far ahead of everybody, it's a little bit, it's very premature. But yeah, I mean, we're watching a historically talented team that has been incredibly effective on both ends of the floor and in a pretty unprecedented way. But again, like, it's March, right? So like, I think we shouldn't, like, we can have this conversation in July, August. And where does this team rank compared to some other championship teams? It'll probably, if they pull this out, this will be one of the better championship teams we've seen in recent history. But a lot has to go well still for that to happen.
Absolutely.
Come on, Max. Stop trying to bait.
No, it's what everybody's talking about. But
yeah, seriously.
Yeah. The numbers are obviously there. It's crazy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Noah. This was a great conversation. And we'll have all this in the description. But before we go, can you tell people where they can see you on Twitter, what you're writing, any videos you're putting together, just anywhere they can find your content?
Yeah, Twitter is the best place. My handle is Noa Dalzell NBA. And I also cover the Connecticut Sun. So if you're interested in WNBA content, I'll be doing some of that this summer as well. And Celtics blog is where you can find my writing. So yeah, really appreciate being on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much.